Thanks everyone. So I want to start with inviting our panelists to come onto the stage. So first up we have Yamini Atmavilas. Yamini is a president of the Udaiti Foundation, which is under the Convergence Foundation. Prior to working with Udaiti, she's held multiple portfolios on women's economic empowerment programs, What Works initiatives, and also with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I also want to extend a special thanks to Yamini because one part of the State of Working India report is an India Working Survey, which was a two-state survey that we did in Karnataka and Rajasthan. And Yamini was instrumental really in supporting us through that survey. And so we're really very happy to have her here and welcome you onto stage, Yamini. Next we have Sowmya Dhanaraj. Sowmya is a senior research fellow at Good Business Labs. She's also an assistant professor at Madras School of Economics, currently on leave. At Good Business Labs, Sowmya her research works on women's labor market attachment, issues relating to their health and well-being, specifically with regard to their work in garment industries. Thank you, Sowmya, for coming. I'd like to invite Professor Kalaiyarasan. He is an assistant professor at Madras Institute of Development Studies and also a visiting scholar at King's College London. Prior to that, he was a Fulbright Nehru Scholar with Brown University. Professor Kalai also recently published a book called the Dravidian Model Interpreting the Political Economy of Tamil Nadu. And thank you for joining us all the way from Madras. And finally, I'd like to invite Ms. Tara Nair. She's the co-founder and director of research at Work Fair and Free Foundation. So the Work Fair and Free Foundation is part of it's sort of incubated within Aajeevika Bureau. And the larger mandate of WFF is to really look at labor migration and look at research centered around informal labor migrants with the mandate of giving informal labor migrants secure and dignified work. Thank you for joining us. So Yamini, I think we'll start with you first. So I think one of the themes, overarching kind of theme with the report has been around women's employment, and specifically we are looking at this interplay of norms on the one hand as well as labor demand on the other hand. So for example, like Amit said, you have a situation like in Bangladesh where you have massive expansion of garment factories and then women sort of coming out into employment. Could you speak a little bit about how these two forces kind of play with each other? And also, given your research and work with policy organizations, what can you tell us about what has been responses that have worked to kind of bring women into the workforce?
Thank you so much. And first of all, congratulations to the team. This is such a wonderful report. I feel like I've gone back to reading again, which is I think we're so used to the PDF on WhatsApp sort of way of absorbing knowledge and new things coming out. So have been a huge sort of fan, and definitely this is one of the best reports today out there on the topic. So the question of norms versus demand, I think one of the first things, and what Amit sort of that little like smart art graphic that you put out there, I think one of the things is that we think norms only pertain to women's lives and entry barriers and what's happening on the supply side in terms of labor. And as if markets are somehow value-free, norm-free, and that they are fair at the end of the day, that equilibrium is very, very fair, and that somehow if those market incentives are fixed and we create the right markets, that they will all work fairly. And I think that's just not true. And so one of the things that also came out in this presentation was the suggestion from the data, but something that a lot of other micro studies and experiments have shown, that there is real bias, that there is a value system in markets, labor markets, as well as broader credit markets or any other market, financial markets that we want to talk about. So I think one of the first things is that everything has some norm. And so norm is like part of, for me, that structure, the superstructure with which we all operate. Who's creating and shaping these markets, policies, etc.? It is people. It is sort of our educational systems. It may be at a very structural level, but it's not that it's devoid of this and there is a AI bot. Sort of even that now is, of course, full of I think there's a lot of work happening on the bias of AI, and including gender bias. So I think one is just to accept that there are probably value systems that are shaping a lot of this. So that is the first sort of piece I'd like to talk about. And I think the interplay of norms and markets, or the supply and demand norms on either side, has been one of the most interesting things that we've seen. And I would say if I were to give a very strict answer, I'd say now we've shifted a lot from the weight of supply side norms and that gender norms that restrict women or restrict women from achieving the kinds of mobility in terms of education or aspiration. I think that weight has reduced, and there is a lot more right now. There's a larger gap now and a larger sort of problem now on the demand side, which is sort of where Amit's presentation ended, right? And so we really have to unpack what's happening on that side. Why is there not enough demand for women? If you look at the GER ratios, women are at least 50% is in 12th standard is girls, right? You look at a lot of higher education. I mean, STEM is one of the ones that's most talked about. I think you have 40 to 45% of engineering graduates that are girls, right? So I think a lot of the enablers of women's entry into the workforce are in place on the supply side. We're also seeing fertility levels that have dropped. I think these are the two big things we talk about: educational levels increasing and fertility levels dropping, and greater control for women of fertility. And I would say for the last century, contraception is one of the biggest sort of game changers when it comes to gender norms and gender roles. So I think when you have that situation, why is that curve not looking different for India? And I think there is a black box in the demand side that we have slowly started to unpack. It's not that we don't know what some of the things that are happening, but we need to know a lot more. Because I think what we need to do is line up the right incentives, right? Line up the right incentives in terms of the demand for women and the kinds of demand for the kind of work that women want to do. Now, what kind of work do women want? The same kind of work that men want, right? We want good wages. We want a good job. I would say that good job needs to stay on the table. We cannot take away quality. I think there's a lot of discourse right now that to solve for the labor force participation decline in women, let's just create any kind of opportunity and just make sure everyone gets it. But what are you seeing? The data from one of the, I think the world's largest skilling program, IWWAGE, basically shows you that I think 90% attrition once you get placed, right? So you are seeing skilling happening, you are seeing people, girls and boys getting placed, but there is a huge attrition. So if it's not a good job, if it's not a suitable job, whatever that might be, Farzana Afridi uses the term suitable job, right? So if it's not a job that somehow checks a few boxes that women are entering the labor force with, they will drop out. And it's not that they drop out of the labor force entirely. I think they are seeking other kinds of work. These may be very small in terms of the large numbers, but that is also happening. So I think we need to really understand where is that mismatch. Amit talked about this mismatch between, I wouldn't even say it's aspiration to availability. It's like, where is the mismatch in terms of the talent that is being produced? Because when we talk about men, we talk about talent, but somehow when we talk about women, we want to talk about the more micro issues, and maybe there's an aspiration. But actually, there is a talent pool of young women. If you, I think one of the more shocking statistic is 70% of 23-year-olds in India, women, are not in education, employment, or training. So it actually one step before the marriage, 25-year-old that you talked about, is the 23-year-old. So compared to 17% of men, right, of young boys. So those 23-year-old girls are not, before they become unemployed, they're not in anything. Right? They're out of all of this. So there's a clear problem in the opportunities that are out there, because they are taking educational opportunities. There are, companies that seem to want more young women. I think some of the ASI data shows that more younger women are in the south. There's an over-concentration of women in factories in the south. I think the Ashoka University team did this analysis. So where there's demand, there is a rise to meet that. But is that, is it the right kind of demand? Is it the right kind of demand at scale? And is it the right kind of demand that will retain women in the labor force? So I think even before we get into these very individualized supply side things about aspiration, we just have to really see what's that market looking like and why is it not better? Why is it not more gendered? Now, in terms of your question on, I think, policy, so, I mean, what's worked are some of these other country examples or perhaps southern India examples. I think someone brought up Bangladesh. We have to, I think we should not avoid Bangladesh in our discussions, but that whole East Asia, the whole South and Southeast Asia belt, even go back to the US in the 19th century, right? The mill girls, these were young women, rural migrants who moved to the mill jobs in the city. The kinds of jobs that were created were very similar to the garment jobs, perhaps. So there is a certain kind of de-skilling, there's a certain kind of lower wage sort of setup, but it is a factory job. It was a good job for its time. So I think those are the kinds of policy enablers. Now, the question is, will that hold, right? How long will that hold, and what will it do for the gender norms? So this interplay of policies and gender norms, or market and gender norms, is really interesting. So if you look at that whole East Asia sort of experience, not only did you see women migrating on their own and joining the workforce, you saw delayed age at marriage, you saw delayed fertility decision making, and you saw declines in fertility. So there's a whole set of things that can be set into motion if you get some of it right. Now, has Bangladesh got it all right, or have any of these other countries got it all right? Not really, right? So I think it's a very, very context specific, but it's also not a silver bullet. So you will see cycles, and you have to continuously evolve policy, and you have to continuously evolve the right set of things that one needs to do to meet this kind of demand. But I'd say overall, questions of expanding women's asset base is a really important enabler. I mean, if you think of stroke of the pen policies, the changes in inheritance laws, the kinds of tax holidays for women owning property, I think while we may say that these are, very superficial, or they're just a way to create proxy ownership for men, you still have a set of women who are benefiting from this. And that whole, I think we have to shift this whole idea of economic participation. In addition to employment, there's almost like a spectrum of things one has to set in motion. So I think some of these are sort of, maybe I'll submit that and then see if there's more Q&A.
Thanks, Yamini. I want to move to you, Sowmya, and continue with the theme of women's employment. So I know that with your time at GBL and also your research before that, you've looked at women on factory floors and kind of looked at what are their aspirations and how are these salaried jobs, which women are increasingly in, how have these fared for women? I mean, do they sort of match their aspirations, and are they able to retain themselves in the workforce? But also specifically about how basic things like life cycle events like marriage and childbirth come into play even when women are in these kinds of salaried employment. How are women responding to this?
Thank you for this opportunity, Amit and Rosa, for having me here today. And I diligently read the first 5 chapters successfully, and every graph and every table I went through. It's a wonderful report. Kudos to the team who has worked on this, and yeah. To answer your question, I just want to, in my work, I have talked to a lot of government factory people, managements, employer side perspective. So I just want to bring their perspective. So this is about a story in, and also this is also from the policy perspective. Like I'm part of the Tamil Nadu State Planning Commission's employment committee. So this is also one of the stories that we hear from the bureaucrats. So just to give a bit background, so we were talking to this textile factory owner who has been in this business for the last 60 years. So this is their 3rd generation of the factory, and then they when we asked them about if you talk to the factories, they constantly complain about labor problems. That is, they don't get all the labor. The attrition is 7 to 8%. I'm talking about formal sector jobs, and these are like proper formal, like because they're covered by all the social security benefits, including maternity benefits and so on. And if you talk to the employer side, the story is it's 7 to 8% attrition every month. Like, so the entire, almost the entire labor force turns over in a year. So there is something that is going on, because this is what the employers keep complaining about, and we've looked at large government factories as well. Now, they say that, okay, I have a factory here, and for every job that there is an opening, there is also a data center near. This is about a small town in south of Tamil Nadu. There is a data center that is near the factory, where the job is, they take people who have a 12th grade or a graduation, and they go to the data center. They look at pictures of cars every day, and they keep clicking the car pictures, because they are actually training an AI to identify cars, right? And that job pays 7,000 rupees per month. But you're sitting in an office in an AC, right? And it is a data center job. You're doing a computer work. You're doing IT work, okay, right? And the factory that is nearby, it's a government factory. It has been there. It has been providing employment to 60 years. Since it has been there since the British time, actually. And they say that for every job that the data center opens, they have 3 applicants. Whereas for every 3 jobs, I get 1 applicant. And it's really hard for them to get men, women to work on the factory floor. And I paid 12,000 per month, with including EPF, job protection, and all that comes with that, right? So there is norms here. One thing I felt that is the issue that is not touched in the report is the social prestige associated with the jobs. And in India, the culture, the society plays so much more importance compared to, you take Southeast Asia. It's not about earning your bread and butter. It's something more than that. Your marriage prospects depend on that. What your children do, everything depends on the kind of job, not your wages, but also the kind of job, whether you're an office person or whether you're a factory person. So this is where I want to start my story with, that when we talk to women, when we ask the question, when did you start working, or why did you start working in this factory, right? Most of the women say that I started working because my father was an alcoholic, my father passed away due to some illness, my husband is no more, my husband is not able to support our family. Always it is distress-driven. So in that case, like, increasingly the factories in Tamil Nadu, people talk about Tamil Nadu being a high. In fact, it is one of the best in terms of manufacturing employment in the country. But increasingly, the factories in Tamil Nadu are not even able to get the labor, because the aspirations have surpassed factory jobs. The education levels have surpassed factory jobs. 50%, Tamil Nadu has highest tertiary gross enrollment rates in the country. More than 50% of the people are going for higher education, where India's average is around 20% or so, or even less. So Tamil Nadu has surpassed for all these things. So it is at a state. So when we talk to policymakers, we say that, we need to open textile factories for women to create jobs for women. But that's not true. It's not true you cannot. Now, factories in Tamil Nadu need to bring migrants from all the way from North and Northeast India to even run their factories. 30% of their factories are migrant labor, and they cap it at 30%. If they want to keep it like determined by free market equilibrium, it would have been much more than that, right? So there is this angle of social prestige, and as I told you that. The factory floor jobs, especially in the southern states, are no more those aspiration jobs that we are thinking of. So just for instance, since Yamini mentioned about the suitable jobs, see, the problem of suitable jobs itself, when you say these jobs are suitable for women, you already bring norms there. Why are certain jobs suitable for women and not for men, right? Is it because you are just making them suitable, given that they already have all these constraints, so they can only do this kind of jobs, right? So that is a big question. And a lot of women say that they are here till the marriage, and they say that when we ask them, will you continue working after marriage? The question is, we don't know. Then if the thing is, if the jobs are really empowering, these jobs are really empowering for men, they would say that I will try to tell my parents that I want to find a person who allows me to, who gives me the freedom to continue to do the work that I want to. But most of them say that it is not, because they don't think it is empowering, or they don't think that this actually fetches them a good social status in the society. So we need to also think about this intersection of these things. Another thing I just wanted to add is that, see, in your report, you have said that the law, which is one thing that is very unusual for India, is a lot of these jobs that are created have been in trade and construction, which is much more than other countries which have similar per capita GDP, which is very unusual for India. Again, trade and construction, especially trade and services, this is driven mostly by men. So this sector is considered mostly that jobs that can be done only by men, right? It's very high, mining, trade, and these are some of the industrial sectors were mostly driven by men. And even within manufacturing, garment, textiles, yes, leather, yes. But any other industry, you again see they become male-dominated sectors. Now, why is this the case? The norms, I feel, lose a strong play. The norms, see, we can tell that education levels have improved, the fertility rates have fallen, so it must be much more, on the supply side, a lot more things have become easier. But earlier, because certain times people ask this question, that if women, norms have not become worse over time. That is something that we will all agree with. Given that rising education levels and falling fertility rates, norms certainly have not become worse over time, right? It might have stagnated or something. But then, right? But then why is then the labor force participation falling? We are not, somehow this story connect is missing. You can take at one point of time and say that, oh, she left the job at Madhu. But earlier, the norms did exist, but the jobs were also existed such that they could play around in the, they could still work. For instance, working in a family farm, working in your own village, right? Now you don't have that much work in your village. You need to go out of the village. So the norms become stronger there. Now the jobs don't exist in the sector that earlier that existed for women, like agriculture or textiles. It exists in, let's say, trade or other this thing, where women have to migrate, but there are norms around migration. There are norms around mobility. Like, I'm so happy that you brought these things into the mainstream, because these are always like some side topics that people dealt with, but it's now discussed in the mainstream because of the kind of interest your report has generated. So this is where I want to stress that we should still think about norms, and also, like, with changing education levels, how have norms itself changed for women? Is it more about now working from home or working outside home? Is that the constraint? Is it more about the kind of job? Like earlier, agriculture was okay for women, but now non-agriculture jobs are not okay for women because women tend to mix with unknown strangers if you go for a factory work. Is that the case? Right? So these are some of the things that we might have to go into the details of. And this is where I feel that no woman thinks of, most of the women I've come across don't think of factory work as something they want to do for their lifetime. They think that this is a stopgap arrangement where they want to educate their siblings, or they want to help their parents pay their debts, but they want to do something else, right? And why is that the case? I want to stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Sowmya. So, I mean, on the note of sort of, prestigious jobs and what are sort of suitable jobs, Kalai, I want to come to you to talk about there's this idea that certain groups and certain castes specifically are supposed to be in certain kinds of occupations. Could you perhaps talk about how that to those kind of norms around what people should do, specifically in terms of castes, has stalled the process of structural change in India? And also to push a little further on what is it that we need to be looking at to understand these processes better?
Thank you, Rosa. It's wonderful to be here, and thanks, Amit, and having me here. And I've read the report. In fact, I must say, it's one of those rare pieces of scholarship which combines very rigorous data sets and also with very theoretically grounded questions. It's a very, very rare combination of having. Generally, reports are summary of the data and, descriptive statistics. But here you have a report which actually combines both very effectively. Congratulations for that. So for the question, let me use this question to make answer this question more in a historical perspective as to how does social norm are related to caste, if you assume the caste is part of that social norm, influence the economic outcome, or the question that is the subject of today, the report title Amit discussed in detail of the structural transformation. How does it connect with the structural transformation question? As Amit defined, structural transformation is moving from low productive to the high productive, or agriculture to industry, or some kind of progress, or creating more opportunities to people. So how does it display? I think I just want to take these questions to the classroom of the master's students. If you understand the theoretical debate of India's development story, of what are the big debates, if you look at last 70 years, or even if you look at the last 10 years debate of the Bhagavati Sen debate, it's very popular. In the sense, the economics are generally divided in understanding why India failed to transform the way the Southeast Asia transformed, or most of the developing countries transformed, which Amit clearly mentioned. Even if you control the per capita income, your employment generation is low, your own participation is low, your range of indicators is low. So this, it's called as some way called as a stunted, or you call as a stunted transformation, or something problem with the structural transformation, which one typically expect that's supposed to happen. So question is, if you ask an economist, the typical answer would be, it's divided again, very rich debate, volumes of books have been written on India as to how much the state should intervene, how much the market should intervene. This is the debate. If you ask anyone why India failed to transform in this particular way, if you look at, say, Palwalia or Bhagavati, that set of economists would say it's India's failure lies in because the excessive state intervention, there is no business for the state in the business. If you ask the left economists, they would say it is state supposed to be there, there's an excess market intervention, therefore things went wrong, and there's a privatization, there's a commercialization, etc. There's a story goes on. But I think I would bring this debate back. Maybe if you think this question in a different way, what if we think this, both market and state in India operates what we call as a social norm? What if the social norm we think is a governing principle or the guiding principle which decides the way in which the state should intervene, or the state should provide a public goods, or the way in which the education budgets to be allocated, the way in which health systems to be designed? If the social norm governs that intervention, perhaps your intervention would have been different. Perhaps say, think of this counterfactually, as economists do. Take this, all the outcome variables, now put this in the equation on the other side, ex ante. What if your education status, what if other indicators had been good in the ex ante? Perhaps your transformation would have been greatly different than what we see today. Perhaps your women participation would have been drastically different. Perhaps your social identity inclusion, the Dalits, the OBC that we see here today, perhaps would have been gained different way. So now I ask this question, what is the social norm? How it is connected? I'm talking little in abstract. Let me break down into just few components. If you ask the development, again, I'll just go back to the development economists as to why India failed. What are these key factors that brought this situation that we are not able to generate the kind of jobs that one have generated? So typically the answer would be, ask any economist, those who are familiar with this literature, they'd say India historically failed to provide education to its masses. It's well documented. If you compare per capita, as you economists do, as controlling the per capita income, because the initial argument was India is a poor country, we had less resources, therefore we could not put money in the education. But that's not the case. If you control our per capita income, we were actually really underfunding. Now things have improved. But if you look at the 80 years, where the starting point of the 80s, today's starting point of the conversation is the 40 years of the economic transformation. What was the situation in the 80s? If you look at the comparative data, India was very poor in providing education. And more so, even in the small budget that was put in the, in the in the education department, large chunk went to the higher education. So then the question comes, where the social norm come from? How is social norm connected to this question? Let me explain this. This is a guy called Myron Weiner. He was a political scientist, was in MIT, who was actually perplexed. How come India, which came with so much promise of freedom, anti-colonial struggles, actually did not squarely failed providing its masses of providing the basic education? Then he did this interviews with the planners and the policymakers and understanding this question, how come you guys actually put so little amount on the primary education? Because remember, our fund, although it is our right to education is a fundamental, it's not a fundamental right. It was in the directive principle in the constitution until the SSA came, Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan came in 2000. So it's been like every time the amendment has been postponed. Still recently, we were actually not sending all our children to school. So then Myron was surprised as to how this happened. Then he interviewed these planners and the policymakers. He just got a very, very interesting and surprising, perhaps not surprising now if we look at the way things are happening around us, is that there is a clear elite bias among the policymakers despite their good intention. Otherwise, they are statesmen, otherwise they are good-intended individuals. What is that social norm that guides them? What is the purpose of educating these guys when you don't have created enough jobs? Or who will do other rest of the jobs? Everybody got educated. So this is not my statement. It's a book, name is Child Labor and Education. This is a Myron Weiner book, 1991. This is the way in which social norm can potentially guide your policy input, but that would have an impact for your social transformation question. Second intervention one can think of the social norm, which is health sector. Take the health sector again, if you ask, again, typically economics are divided on whether how much money that the public should intervene or the share of the public expenditure, how can you control the out-of-pocket expenditure. There's a rich debate between the market versus state. Basically, again, the mix of ownership or the mix of intervention between the state market debate. But again, if you look at the social norm question, I have a friend who is now just recently finished his PhD. His thesis on public health and the way in which the doctor-patient relationship operates in India. Historically looked at the data, and with the ethnographic interviews, he comes to a very, very interesting finding. He says the worsening of the health outcome, or if there's a problem of, say, the doctor-patient relationship or the way in which the health system works, you cannot reduce this problem to the commercialization, the privatization that began in 1991, which could have been the important component in that way of explaining the health outcome. But he says, takes into the question of, again, the caste or the elite, the bias or the kind of traditional norm that operated still guides the health transaction, health aspects. So what I'm trying to say, the social norm here, I'm using in an open-ended. Again, the question everybody would be thinking, what is the social norm? How do you measure it? See, let me define again. It's very risky. It's a very intangible. It's something. Think of, say, the way we actually interact with each other, how we treat our one with the other, all the transactions that we do, the way, the things that we guide, that the transaction that between two individuals, because typically economists thinks our social norm is an aggregation of the individual preferences, microeconomic theory. If you take that, that's not the case. If you just, let me explain that with, again, with some simple examples. I can think of the social actually break into two, maybe broadly two components, as Amit mentioned. Is kind of governance or the institution which governs our everyday life and our economic transactions, or our way in which even the state citizenship, the things works exchange. Or one can also think the ideology, again, which has some connection with this institution. You can think of all of this put together broadly the meta-narrative which governs our functioning, the way in which we exchange, the way in which we interact, all actually operates. This is actually definitely influenced health and education. Third component, which is, I guess, very important in India's case, and why that is also directly connected with the structural transformation question of entrepreneurship, which is, if you look at any countries in the world, which actually succeeded transforming its economy, particularly from, say, traditional agriculture to the modern industry, which has to come from some kind of organic entrepreneurship. In the sense, small guys becoming big, agriculture becoming, the one agriculture becoming, say, maybe rice mill or something you start, then you gradually becoming big. India did not do that. We had agriculture, suddenly you have this family businesses big, except few enterprises which in the IT sector which happen. Again, that is linked with the kind of intervention that you had in higher education. So the truncated reform or truncated structural transformation is all linked with your public policy in health and education, the way in which you are encouraged your entrepreneurship. India squarely failed in that. And which is again connected to your social norm, I would say, again, caste, which Amit clearly mentioned. If you look at the ownership pattern, clearly emerges very, very small. Even if you have a surplus money, those who had a better amount of money in their hand, it is difficult to move from one, if it is controlled by the different community, different caste groups to enter. There is something called barrier to entrepreneurship. This range of factors, I'm not just reducing to one causal factors to explain, but there is a connection here. That's what I want to make. How that connection, what are the way in which works, how that connection works across India, whether it operates the same way within North and South. There's a debate around that. But there is a question here which is connected to the social norm again. Then the fourth component. Okay. So, yes, the summary is we need to think of maybe moving beyond this binary of the state market thing to explain not just an outcome, also locate this question in the process itself. Ex ante. Put the things in the equation, other side of the equation, and see what would have been the difference. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry for interrupting, but I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. Tara, coming to you. I think, so you've worked a lot around the issue of migrant labor. And I think something that we struggled, and also something that we saw during the COVID time was, the lack of data and lack of information around who migrants are, where are they going, what are their experiences like. So based on your work at WFF, could you speak a little bit about how do we systematically collect information around migrant workers? But also, what should a labor architecture look like that intrinsically allows for social protection systems for migrants as well?
Thanks, Rosa. And I think I should also start by saying that that was a wonderful report. Especially, you know, that employment statistics in India is eternally sort of criticized for its lack of representing, a lot of things which actually goes on in the field. But I think this report, by very cleverly, craftily, sort of slicing and dissecting and, and also combining with other kinds of insights, I think it's an absolutely, it was an absolute, treat to listen to the kind of, analytical sort of, and I thought I could really go on listening to what exactly, this report may talk about. I think we all have different kinds of experiences to either counter what, was presented or to support, what was presented. In my experience, I would say that, much of what, was presented here and much of what the report talks about very significantly reinforces a lot of our hunches, experiences, or observations from the field. So I represent, today 2 organizations by virtue of, not, a representative not being here from Aajeevika Bureau, which works with, which incubated my organization, Work Fair and Free Foundation, and which has been working for the past 20 years with migrant workers. Starting with Western India, Aajeevika is right now working almost, a good part of India. One of the significant intractable problems that our work suffers from generally is lack of reliable data. What we have is something which was produced, maybe the reliable data that we have is something which was produced 10 years back. And what has been produced recently, we think, is inadequately representative or inadequately represents the complexities of, labor situation in the field, especially when you're talking about migration. And a large part of the labor force that we discussed today, even if you're talking about the transition from the agricultural labor force to the industrial labor force, that kind of a structural transformation or shift that we're talking about, or much of what we are talking about, the kind of, kind of activities in the garment sector or any other even manufacturing sector, we're actually referring to migrant workers. Migrant workers from disadvantaged regions within this country, and who, who necessarily have come out of agriculture, but have not been absorbed in industry in decent working conditions. So they also carry certain agrarian characteristics to their sort of work and their relationships and, their, other sort of characteristics, labor characteristic with them, which is something which I think we really, which now characterize what we generally very very generously call as informal sector dynamics. Where the labor is, recruited by informal agents, the labor and employer relationship is very informal or non-existent. You get less than what the market offers, and that you cannot unionize, you are not unionized, you cannot organize, or you cannot get into a collective bargaining kind of a situation. So we are really talking about gross neglect and violation of basic social and labor rights around these largely powerless, disadvantaged sort of workers. So the data painfully is very, very deficient, when you really want to understand the situation of migrant workers. So what we depend upon to a very large extent is our own field experiences, because we are very careful and we very, very systematic and conscientious in our understanding of looking at some of these issues in the field. And that data tells us that even when we are claiming that a lot has changed in the post-80s, especially post-90s, and accelerated in the post-2000s, our experience very clearly tells us that much of that is not really very pro-labor or of very poor quality. Let me talk about, because a lot of discussion on gender happened here. And we said that, okay, self-employment, I think to the question on, microfinance, I would say that, this huge surge in microfinance, which happened in the 1990s, is largely because of the infusion of costly credit in the market. That is one part of it. The other part of it is, maybe the unseen part of it, is that many of these women are part of very inconspicuous long value chains. You get into any of this kind of an urban slum in India, you'll find women working doing all kinds of things, from making sanitary pads to maybe some parts of, they are stitching a label to a kind of, branded jean. You can find all kinds of activities, and all of these are not, they maybe get counted as self-employment, or they never may get counted as work at all, but all this is part of value chains, which are organized production by brands. But we don't really see that. So women are integrated very disadvantaged fashion, in a very negative fashion, into the so-called global value chain and this so-called production boom otherwise happening, the brand revolution otherwise happening, and we don't even know what is happening to them and what conditions they are working. So one of our major work areas is actually, urban employment, this kind of employment opportunities of women, and how to really either organize them or really sort of take them out of that and put them in maybe something which they enjoy and they get a better kind of wages for. So the other thing is, a significant part of women's work also gets sort of, undercounted in a very interesting system called Jodi system. A system of, two kind of man and a woman working. And that you see everywhere. That's very rampant in agriculture. You see it in industry. In the processing industry, boilers, and you know that boilers are required in all processing factories across, whether it is garment or any other processing, you need an industrial boiler. And in many of these pockets, the boilers are actually run by men, but actually women are part of it. So it's a very peculiar employment system of two people working, very often families working, but women's work is either unseen or unpaid, or very, very hugely underpaid. And you see this is in sanitation work, and you see in all kinds of, all industrial segments that we see this, this sort of a employment system. Luckily, PLFS has enabled us now to really look at unpaid helpers. That's also after very interesting advocacy by groups and researchers and all that. But still, a large part of women's employment, my point is that is really uncounted or undercounted. So that's definitely a question that we need to pose it with much more seriousness, even before we come to conclusions about women's work participation rate. So I think that needs a complete maybe redefinition. And I think I'll quickly in a couple of more sort of points. If migrants are not counted, we know we will not be able to really offer them social security benefits. We are not giving them decent labor rights, and what to talk about social rights. That's a huge crisis. So seamless access to the kind of citizenship kind of rights or social benefits that all of us, as workers and consultants and self-employed people earn, or organized sector workers earn, those benefits are not accessible to migrants because more often than not, they are not even accepted as citizens in the places of their stay. I know recently, if you really look at, there have been, I think COVID has slightly changed that scenario because we started counting them, and many states have really set up online portals where migrants could self-register, so that, they can be counted in the system. And some of the states, very recently, I take the example of the most literate state in India, Kerala. They recently started an exercise in terms of, they launched it, the local self-governments would, the labor department's sort of initiative, where they will start counting kind of migrant workers. And that happens when we want to criminalize them. We want to mark them, track them. It's not because you want to really give them citizenship rights. So when a migrant worker is involved in a crime, you suddenly, the administration suddenly kind of, wakes up to the need to kind of, identify workers, etc. So huge kind of, bias against some of these kind of forms of labor and, workers. This is in this kind of an environment that we are actually working with the migrants, which is difficult, but in certain situations where the migration has been more permanent, for instance, you can actually establish a corridor between Orissa and Surat, for instance, where you find migrant workers who are settled or semi-settled. It is much easier to really talk to them because there is a little more settled kind of citizenship sort of identity to the workers. Otherwise, we can understand the internal migration is such a dynamic sort of a phenomenon. We really have no ways and no architecture to kind of, count and kind of record that phenomenon at all. So I wonder, like when you really talk about when we try to map the labor geography and labor demography in India, how do we account for this huge segment of migrant workers, and how are we going to really sort of make sure that their rights as workers, whatever little is possible, which is available to the informal sector workers in India, can be made available to them.
Thank you very much to our panelists for a lot of interesting questions and hopefully more research.